This presentation was done with my partner, Anna Charlton. She could not be here. This is from a book that we're just finishing. It's actually probably going to be out in the next month or so, called An Introduction to the Abolitionist Approach to Animal Rights. All right. There are 6 principles with the abolitionist approach to animal rights. The first principle is that all sentient beings, humans or non-humans, have one right, the basic right not to be treated as the property of others. If animals matter morally, if they are not things, okay, it's a binary world. They either have moral significance or they don't. If they have moral significance, they cannot be property. Why? Because to be property means to be something that has no intrinsic or inherent value. Okay? It is to be something that has only extrinsic or external value. It is to be a thing. It is to be a something, not a someone. Now, we recognize this in the human context. We can debate various forms of discrimination as to whether they can be justified or not, but we all agree. Indeed, one of the few principles of customary international law, there are only a few principles that are accepted by all nations. Okay? One of those principles is that human slavery is wrong. Why is human slavery qualitatively different from other forms of exploitation? Because if you are a slave, you're not in the moral community at all. You're completely outside the moral community. Someone else, your owner, has the ability to value you and may value all of your interests and your life at 0. Okay? You have no value except that which is accorded to you. Your valuation of yourself is simply not respected. You are a thing. You are not a person. This is why everybody recognizes slavery is wrong. That doesn't mean to say that slavery doesn't exist. It still does. Unfortunately, it still does. But nobody defends it. When they find, when some story comes out about slavery, that slavery's been discovered someplace, nobody jumps to the defense of slavery and says, well, this is really not a bad thing. As they do other forms of discrimination, people debate other forms of discrimination as to whether or not, certain benefits should be given to people or whether certain benefits have to be given to people in order for them to be equal, etc. People debate those things. Nobody debates the morality of slavery. Everybody recognizes it as a violation of the fundamental right of a person to be a person, because if a human is a slave, then the human cannot be a person. The human is a thing. There can be no balance. We can't balance the interests of property and non-property, because one of the things that animal welfare seeks to do is to balance the interests of humans and non-humans. You can't balance the interests of, you can't balance the interests of property and property owners. Property owners always win. There were all sorts of laws that protected slaves when we had race-based slavery, which existed in the British Commonwealth. It certainly existed in the United States. And so we had laws that protected slaves. Did the laws work? No, because they involved situations in which there were conflicts between slave owners and slaves. If you're going to have a system of slavery, slave owners have to win. Slaves can't win, or else you don't have slavery. Okay? So there can be no balance of interest when you're talking about slaves. The slave always loses. All humans have the right, are considered to have the pre-legal moral right not to be slaves, irrespective of their personal characteristics. So it's not something we give to only smart people or to beautiful people or to talented people. You have it by virtue of the fact that you are a person. We might have issues at the margins. For example, what if somebody is irreversibly comatose? Can we use that person as a resource to take organs out of? Well, what have they said before they got into the comatose state, etc. But basically, we regard all sentient beings, all beings, and sentience is not a complicated concept. It just means you're subjectively aware. You're perceptually aware, you're subjectively aware. All sentient beings, all sentient humans, are considered to have the right not to be a chattel, not to be used exclusively as resources for others. Okay, y'all following this so far? Is there anybody you're all right? Is it clear? Is it clear? All right, good. All right. Animals are property. They have no value except as commodities. Now, you're probably saying, but wait a minute. We have pets. I love my dog. I love my cat, blah, blah, blah. And the answer is, yes, they're your property. You can love them if you wish because they're your property and you get to decide how to value their interests. Okay? So just like you have an automobile, you can choose to take very good care of your automobile, to have it maintained properly, and you have to have it maintained so that you can pass inspection, but you can choose to polish it a lot and take a lot of care of it, or you can just let it basically rot as long as it can get through inspection. Okay? Because it's your property. You can value it high, you can value it low. That's what happens. That's one of your rights as a property owner. Same thing with your dogs and your cats, or your birds or whatever you have. That you can value them. You can value them high. You can love them and regard them as members of your family. And you can also dump them at a kill shelter today. You can take them to a veterinarian to be killed. You can't legally abandon them in most places, but people do. The bottom line is you can value them high, you can value them low, but they're your property. Okay? Now, the justifications we've given to treat animals, to justify our treatment of animals as property, we basically said, well, they can't use language, they aren't rational, they can't use abstractions, blah, blah, blah. All of these, throughout history, we've tried to justify our treatment of animals as things by pointing to certain characteristics that they lack. Okay? But the bottom line is, this is a completely speciesist way of looking at things because there is no defect that animals have, whether it's the inability I believe that animals, that non-human animals, at least many of them, can engage in rational thought, that they do use abstractions, but it doesn't really matter. All that matters is sentience. And there is no defect that animals have, assuming that they aren't rational, they aren't able to use abstract concepts, they can't use symbolic communication. Let's assume that that's all true. There are some humans who can't do that, but we would never think of using those humans exclusively as resources for other humans. As a matter of fact, in my country, you can have a complete lack of cognitive characteristics. You can be a complete idiot and we'll make you president, as George Bush was for 8 years. Okay? We need to recognize that if we aren't going to be speciesist, and we're going to say that all sentient humans, irrespective of how smart they are, or how not smart they are, or how beautiful they are, or how not beautiful they are, or whatever, they all have the right not to be treated as chattel property. They all have the right not to be treated exclusively as a means to the ends of another. Okay? And so do animals. So do non-human animals. Okay, as long as they're sentient. Now you say, well, what's a sentient? Who's sentient? And the answer is, you know what? Because I get this question all the time. Are clams sentient? Are oysters? I don't know. I don't eat them. They may be sentient. There is some indication that they're sentient, that there's some indication that they're not sentient. But so I err in favor. I always err in favor of not killing. And so I don't eat them. Same thing, I don't walk on grass generally. Because I don't know whether insects are sentient. My guess is many are probably not. I don't know. I simply don't know. And so I err in favor of not, I don't want to kill them. And when I live in a rural, I no longer live in New York City, and I live in a more rural environment, and there are all sorts of there are spiders that have a lot of hair and snakes, and we have all sorts of interesting things, and all sorts of insects. And I've overcome my fear of them, and I now catch them in little glasses and things, and I put them outside unless they're too big, and I just leave them alone. But but as long as if an animal is sentient, then if we are not going to be speciesist, then we have to recognize that that sentient non-human has the fundamental right that all sentient humans have, the right not to be treated as property, the right not to be a thing, the right not to be treated exclusively as a resource, exclusively as a means to the ends of others. But that requires that we abolish animal exploitation. Once you see, people say, well, but you're just talking about this one negative right. You're not talking about positive rights. You're talking about the negative right of the animal not to be property. That's right. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about positive rights. I'm talking about I'm talking about a negative right that all sentient beings have the one negative right not to be treated exclusively as means to the ends of others. And recognition of that one negative right requires that we abolish animal exploitation. We simply cannot justify institutionalized exploitation of animals. Now, what about domestication? You say, well, does that mean that we have to end domestication? The answer is yes, that's exactly what it means. It means domestication is a violation of the fundamental right of animals not to be treated as things. And you say, well, but isn't that going to mean that we won't have dogs and cats and companion animals? Yes. We live with 6 rescued, abused animals, canines, dogs, and which is one of the reasons why we no longer live in New York City. And I don't think that you'll find anybody on the planet who enjoys interacting with dogs as much as Anna and I do. And if there were 2 dogs left on the face of the earth, and the issue was whether or not we should have them breed so we could continue to have pet ownership, the answer is not on your life. Domestication is wrong. It should be abolished. If we recognize the fundamental principle of animals not to be treated as things, it means we don't eat them, we don't wear them, we don't use them, we stop bringing them into existence as things that we exploit. The only animals who exist are the ones that exist in the wild, and we leave them alone.